welcome to all of you on a Friday or a Thursday afternoon on Ascension Day. I know Larry reminded us of that. Thank you, Larry. So we're very welcome and fortunate to have you on the other side of the screen. We are very excited because in this webinar, we want to expand your frame of reference, and we want to do it by the knowledge that we want to share of what's happening in our ESA region. And then also, I think, an underlining topic to say that you're not alone. We're here, we want to help you, and we work with the various institutions in the World Customs Organizations and the different customs administration. I will hand over to Larry and Patrick that will give us a broad highlight of what's happening on the ESA region during COVID-19. Then we will go to Fermin that wants to talk about a little bit on the AEO, and we all know in our region we don't have a massive uptake of AEO, but we want to encourage that. And he will go a bit further to say that in the lockdown, it's not just transactional and entity, but how can we do a virtual type of scenario to extend the validation of the AEO. I think then we're very privileged to have Kazim with us on the road transport, because currently in our ESA region, of the 24 members, 11 countries operate in a landlocked scenario, which is very dependent on the road freight, and he will touch on that. And I think then we will come lastly to say, how can we look at the questions that was coming up, and can we share it with all of you? And then also, while we're doing this webinar, we record it, and we will put it on the website as well, on our ESA webinar, or the website that you can see all the different notes. There's the website address, so you can go in on a regular intervals and see all the relevant information that we post. And also, just to put it in context, and maybe Larry and Patrick will talk about it, is we're not an organization that do any mandatory decisions. We compile information, we monitor it, and then we will give it through to the private sector consultative group in Brussels that will work more on our suggestions and see that can they accommodate the suggestions from the region. Okay, so I'm handing over to Larry, and then he will follow by Patrick. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Juanita. Good afternoon to everyone. I don't know everyone who is on call, but I'm glad that you are all here. I want to start by appreciating Juanita, Jacob, and team for setting this up. This is probably now our 6th webinar, but specifically our first on COVID-19. So we are not really new to webinars in this light. Definitely, it's a difficult time for the world, as Patrick will probably highlight, and more so for Africa, and specifically for East and Southern Africa. As at this afternoon, Africa has 94,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and around 1,800 deaths. So that's nearly 2,000 deaths. The East and Southern Africa region has about 28,000 cases and 522 deaths. So normally when we look at the quantity and quality of trade, the East and Southern Africa usually accounts for about 50% of the GDP of Africa, of the trade volumes of Africa, and of the amounts of money spent by Africa in trade. Nevertheless, the region is a bit lucky with COVID-19 because it's accounting for just about 25% of the deaths and about 25% of the cases. The situation in the region remains dire. Most revenue administrations have faced drops in revenue from a range of 2% to 10% over the last 1 month. Particularly April and May is definitely going to see the same. All the countries in East and Southern Africa are largely on complete lockdown, except Tanzania, and each and every country basically reports cases as soon as they are there. Kenya is one of the countries that reports daily whether there are cases or not. So the current situation regarding matters of lockdown is that Most countries started by lockdowns from about 14 days to 30 days, all which lapsed, and these have since been extended by an average of 21 days for every country, largely to end of May. Most revenue administrations are working from home. A few are going to work, either working in shifts, because the big challenge that we have noticed most revenue administrations are having is the ability to work remotely, either because their ICT systems are confined on the local area network, and it's taking a lot of energy to unlock them to enable them work. So many of them still, half of them still have to go, half the staff or a percentage still have to go to work. Nevertheless, the last 1 week has seen people rising and waking up and increased numbers returning to work. So by and large, that is the summary situation in Eastern Southern Africa, and it will cover as well in the meeting.
Thank you, Larry. If I can go to Patrick, which is situated in Brussels, and he's looking directly after the ESA region. Patrick, welcome.
Thanks for the opportunity to represent the WCO on this webinar. It's a pleasure to meet you all. What a time to really get back to business. It's such a difficult time now as the COVID pandemic has presented to the entire world. Thank you, Larry, for the comprehensive background and a very vivid picture of what is happening in the ESA region. From the WCO perspective, of course, I believe we are all privy to the analysis, numerous analyses that have been put out there by several international organizations, partner organizations. So I will not go too much into all the details, but we are very much aware how this pandemic is grossly affecting economic business. It is affecting health and changing people and organizations the way we're all working. What the World Customs Organization did right from the onset is to also acknowledge the fact that COVID-19 pandemic has negatively affected border operations. And for that matter, it has a negative impact on trade, travel, and transport. And customs being one of the key organizations at the front line and frontier, was definitely affected. Yet customs had to maintain its day-to-day business operations to ensure that, or to safeguard the supply chain, international trade supply chain. The other balance is that customs administration also had to find a way to protect the staff, the frontline staff. So this was very well communicated to all member administrations, 183 member administrations from the Secretary General. And as a follow-up, the Secretary General also requested member administrations to share their experiences and challenges that we're facing in fighting with this pandemic. What has happened is that there's a survey that has been conducted and is still in progress for members to share their best practices of how they are supporting their various governments in fighting or in addressing the COVID pandemic. Now, what the other immediate thing that has happened is that we had to put out the very good information on the medical supplies. The HS classification references for medical supplies that were related to, the COVID-19. And this was very important. We had to liaise with the World Health Organization to ensure that we put this out there for members to appreciate, for the international business community also to work on this. Now, the outcome of some of the survey is that we've had quite an impressive patronage. Over 100 of the WCO members have responded, and I'm happy to say about 12 countries from the ESA region are involved in it. We are still receiving these responses, but generally it has enabled the WCO to categorize the measures undertaken into some thematic areas that will be useful to share as best practices, experiences, so that other partner organizations, people in business, and other member administrations can adapt to. Essentially, what we have done is to look at how members have responded in facilitating relief goods and relief items, and then essential goods that are essential to the economy, and also how the measures that have been put in place to still support the economy and to keep the supply chain, running. The other category is how members have the measures they put in place to protect staff, as well as measures that are taken to protect the health and safety of society. And then we also accommodate any other measures that are in place. It also calls for a time where we are engaging with partners. I've mentioned the engagement with the World Health Organization, but we go beyond that. And one of the immediate areas that we had to collaborate on was with the treatment of relief items. So the UN OCHA, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, became a very keen partner in ensuring that we reach out to members to provide them with really good information on that. The WCO is constantly collaborating with the private sector consultative group to also listen and address issues related to business. There have been joint statements with international partners. I think that the IRU is here. There has been an International Chamber of Commerce and many more. So these joint statements also kind of reinforce the commitment, and then they stress out exactly what our roles are in this regard. Finally, I'll say we are also looking out for partnerships with development partners to ensure that we will be able to provide some capacity support to customs administrations on how to treat or respond to emergencies in times like this, and ensure that we still have the normal customs business process running without much hitch and all that. So essentially, there's been quite a lot of work and coordination around this, and then of course we are all working from home as well. We're still offering remote assistance to WCO member countries in a manner that we can. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much. I think what we can take from your views is that we definitely want the supply chain to move. And we understand also we do have a bit of a challenge with the cross borders, because I think we realized last week that Mr. Dixon from Uganda was saying a lot of truck drivers is actually spreading the virus, and they're looking at the cross border. So I'm very glad that we have later on the agenda Kazim that's going to talk to that. But before I introduce Fermin to us that will speak on the AEO, I think we all realize now the importance on the AEO in our region, because once we have a secure supply chain and we know how the goods can fly and we can move around or away from transactional audit more to entity audit, I think it could help us a lot into this pandemic. So maybe Fermin, not without more taking your time up, it's a pleasure for you to talk to us about what's happening in the world and how do you see the whole program unfolding and how can we embrace it into our ESA continent and get more people to do an uptake of the program. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Juanita, for this invitation, and thanks to all the other panelists and to everyone listening and watching this webinar. Juanita, I did share the webinar notices with our organization's senior management, so you may have some folks viewing this webinar, possibly from some of the 15 countries in the Americas where we have offices and certified BAS companies. And that would be good because I believe the challenges resulting from the COVID pandemic are common throughout the world. That's one of the things we've learned from this experience, how connected we all are and how vulnerable we are and how much we need each other and working together. And so the issues that we face in one region may easily be the same issues being faced in other parts of the world. And so we need to share and implement solutions together. So today I want to talk a little bit about what I see regarding the AEO program on a global level in my role as a member of the PSCG under the WCO, where I've had the privilege of working with professionals like Juanita, but also in my leadership position with my organization, BASC. So I want to start just by quickly saying a few words about BASC. This is Alliance for Secure Commerce, and how we see the global picture pertaining to supply chain security and steps that we have taken to assist our members to maintain their security during this crisis. And some of these ideas might be useful to the East and Southern Africa region members. Well, first of all, BASC is a nonprofit member-led organization that has over 3,000 members, companies in 15 countries, covering all sectors of the international supply chain. And we are based in the Americas, but we plan to expand globally. We also have over 290 AEO members among our 3,000 companies. And these members are in 10 countries. And we have another 230 companies that are business partners of these AEO companies. We also have MOUs and cooperation agreements with the WCO, US Customs, and other customs administrations in the countries where we operate. So very quickly, what we have learned and implemented and focused on in our organization, BASC, with our 3,000 member companies, we've looked at the situation, and it didn't take very long for all of us to realize we were in something that we had never seen. So we're improvising, we're reacting to something where we don't have a recipe or formula or something we can pull out of the drawer and see, okay, this is how we did it last time. This is the first time. So we're all learning. We have to make allowances for that. Customs and the business community, all of us. One thing we did learn in our organization that we've tried to move forward on, basically we focus on in 3 areas. The first one is audits. We have 3,000 companies, and to be a BASC member, you're required to submit the company to an annual audit. And our audits are very much aligned along in the same way as AEO validations. So we realized that we couldn't do the same audits that we traditionally have done because the companies, many of them were closing down, reducing their staff, working from home, as has been mentioned. And we're all operating in this situation. And BASC itself, in our 23 offices, we have been working from home as well because of the work from home requirements that have been imposed by government and by companies themselves because it was not safe for them to continue to operate. And so in this environment, we looked at virtual audits, and we call them remote audits. And we developed procedures, which I'm happy to share with you, Juanita, after the session. And in these procedures, we outlined the protocols that we would follow in conducting virtual audits. And I'm pleased to say that since April 21st until a few days ago, we've conducted over 150 of these virtual audits. And our experience so far has proven that we can take advantage, all of us, of the technology that exists today to verify compliance with AEO requirements, in our case, with our BASC requirements. And we have had very favorable responses from the companies. And so we are convinced that virtual audits work. And it's something that not only should we fully embrace during this period, but consider using these this new method of verifying compliance beyond the period, the COVID period, which we hope will end soon. And the other area that we have also focused on is in training. Just during the COVID crisis, we have conducted over 120 webinars, training sessions, workshops, and these 120 events have been attended by over 10,000 people. So that's a lot of training, actually more than we would have conducted in the same 60, 90-day period.
Yeah.
And the third thing has to do with what we're doing here today, working together. And as I mentioned, what we have learned from the crisis is how dependent we are on each other and vulnerable as well. So this webinar, and thank you again for inviting me to participate, is something that is a lesson. If we needed a lesson, certainly we have it now. So quickly, moving over to what we have been doing at the PSCG, where I am a member, and Juanita, we've looked at the same situation and realized that customs and the trade are working from home because we have been ordered to do so. And in that environment, how can AEO programs conduct validations? How can companies welcome a team of validators when the key people may be not even at the location? There's difficulty in obtaining documents, and on all the issues that are obvious when you are operating the way we are today. So what we've done in the PSCG, the first thing we thought that should take place is that AEO programs should continue giving an extension to companies as their certifications come due. So if you have a 1-year certification and you have to revalidate your credentials after 1 year, that's very hard to do right now. So we thought the immediate issue was to extend the certification period to companies. And so that's something that we have proposed to PSCG as a subgroup. We worked on this issue. We presented it to the broader PSCG members, and it has been approved at our level and has now been forwarded to the WCO for consideration and application on a global level. We also realized that during this period, MRAs are more important than ever. And as you know, mutual recognition agreements are arrangements between one customs and another, whereby the AEO status of a company in one country may be recognized in another. Obviously, as we are improvising or developing ideas that work, we have come up individual customs administrations and AEO programs as they develop procedures for operating under this COVID crisis. They need to also, AEO programs, consider their MRA obligations. So that's another issue that needs to receive special attention. And the third issue has to do with facilitation. AEO programs promise facilitation benefits to their members. And we think it's very important during this period that these facilitation benefits be fully employed. Otherwise, I fear that we will lose credibility with AEO programs when in the time of greatest need, the benefits don't work. So we are encouraging at the PSCG through a document that Juanita mentioned that has been now presented to the WCO, that the WCO members consider the facilitation benefits that are being offered to companies, make sure that they are fully available. And in fact, we should look at this opportunity to look at other benefits that we may have missed that are very important now in order to maintain the flow of commerce. The second recommendation that we discussed at the PSCG and will be the focus of a second paper that we will be preparing has to do with virtual validation. So I just mentioned extensions of the certification period, and we consider that to be something that can be done right away. But then the other issue is, how do we conduct validations in this current situation if it continues and even beyond? And so we looked at the idea of virtual validations, and we realized that virtual validations in one country is fine, but AEO is a global program that was developed under the SAAFF framework of standards in 2005, and so we shouldn't just every customs administration implement their own AEO changes in virtual validations, but rather we should try to do it in as much as possible in a standardized manner, and that's where the WCO comes in, and that's why this will take some time. It'll take the work of members at the WCO SAAFF working group. It will take the work of members at the PSCG. It will certainly benefit from input from your region and your members, the members of the East and Southern Africa group. And so we welcome all of these ideas so that the WCO can look at what is the best way of carrying out virtual validations. We also need WCO leadership, and that's the leadership is through the SAAFF working group, but also other entities at the WCO to work together with the members and with the private sector through the PSCG to develop these protocols to conduct for the purpose of conducting virtual validations. We also need to look at the technology that's used for validation. So companies have issues as far as security, customs as well. So we need to agree on a platform that would be used that's secure and works so that these validations can take place. We also need to recognize that we're still, after all these years, we're still operating in a paper world. And so we need to attack the paper, digitize it, automate it for business reasons. But now, if we're talking about virtual validations, that's more important than ever. That the documents, the evidence that a company is complying with AEO, that it be in a format where it can be shared with validators, so that the process of validation can be done more efficiently. We also believe that a written agreement between the company and customs is fundamental, so that there's a clear understanding of how a virtual validation will take place and the obligations of each party. And finally, we think that once you have the recipe and you're ready to go and cook your pie, it needs to be tested, it needs to be tasted. And so it's key that a virtual validation protocol at the WCO level under the SAAFF framework of standards be tested so that we can see if there are issues that we might have missed. And finally, the whole issue of MRA should be reviewed because of this new relationship that we have, an obligation to make sure that what we do in one country is also fully vetted and discussed with the other when you have an MRA. So in conclusion, virtual validations can work, but more planning is required to allow WCO and AEOs to develop uniform practices. Number two, we should start now with specific verifications of AEO requirements that lend themselves to remote validations. So we don't need to wait. We can look at those things that we can now do and integrate them into the physical validations if they are occurring at all. Now, there was a few other things I wanted to touch on, looking at the questions in the agenda that were addressed to me. I'll just quickly go through them. And one of the questions was, how can we emphasize the role of AEO to facilitate legitimate trade in crisis times? I think the most important thing here is trust. Trust is the foundation of the AEO program. Trust is the foundation of the SAAFF framework of standards. In Pillar 1, we talk about customs having trust in other customs and working together, excuse me. But there's also the issue of trust between customs and the trade. And so it's very important that this trust be kept in mind. And so we've been working together since 2005, and actually before that. So there should be by now, a certain level of, well, I would say a high level of trust between customs and the trade. We also need to leverage trade associations, groups like yours, and other international organizations, and take advantage of them. And that's what happened when the when the SAAFF framework of standards was developed, created, and socialized. So we need to work together. Trade associations are key, and customs should be looking at taking advantage of that resource to promote changes and develop new ideas. Number two, we need a robust AEO program that ensures the commitment by companies and the AEO validators. So we have to have a program that works, that's serious, and includes all the things that are necessary to fully establish that a certain company is compliant, certain company is trustworthy, and then we can go to work on the facilitation benefits. We also need greater participation by SMEs. SMEs are critical. They carry the inputs that are for the mass, right? For all the things that are so essential today in dealing with this crisis. But SMEs have always been important. In our organization, we have 3,000 companies. 2/3 of them are SMEs, and so we have established that SMEs can fully participate in these international security programs such as AEO, and we need to get them more involved, of course. And we also need to look at the benefits of facilitation, fast lanes, fewer inspections, to make sure that these benefits are being fully utilized and in place. And so this is one of the ways, these ideas that I just mentioned, how we can emphasize the role of AEO to facilitate legitimate trade during this particular time and beyond. Another question, how can we make the AEO pie larger so as to make a greater impact on global trade movements? Well, CTPAT, the AEO program in the United States, has 11,500 members, and that represents 50% of all the imports. So in the US, clearly there's a critical mass of companies that are AEO certified, not 100%, something closer to 50%. And that's something that the AEO program, the CTPAT program in the United States seems to be happy with. So that allows them to facilitate trade for those companies that are AEO, and at the same time focus more on the companies that are not AEO. So that's one of the things that I wanted to mention, that in order to make a greater impact, we don't necessarily need 100% participation. But I do think that many customs administrations still lack an understanding of border risk management and the importance of the SAFF framework of standards, and how working with the trade is key to developing the benefits that truly facilitate trade in their countries. Another question is, how can SMEs benefit as they provide essential goods during the COVID crisis? Well, I think one of the things that I think is overlooked by SMEs and customs as well is that SMEs need to see the AEO program as a way of putting them in a position to compete with larger companies. AEO programs, certainly in the case of the US Customs CTPAT program, does not discriminate. So a small company can participate and be a member as much as a big company. In fact, it may be even easier for a small company to participate. So I think that once SMEs realize the tremendous competitive benefit of the AEO programs, and we should be selling that to the SMEs, I think we can see a greater interest in participating, and not to be afraid that if I join the AEO program, well, first of all, the barriers are insurmountable. That's not the case. Most of the costs involved with joining an AEO program have to do with personnel and policies and procedures and practices versus going out and spending X amount of dollars in investments. There's some of that, of course, but it's something that is frequently overstated. And I think the last question, how do we streamline the AEO process to build up virtual processes? Virtual validations, as I try to explain, will take some time. We need WCO leadership because it's a global program, and we can't have 180 different AEO programs, although we do have differences. We need to look at how we can digitize and promote the digitization of documents for easy exchange between customs and the companies. We need to identify the requirements that can be verified through this technology. Not every item in an AEO program can readily lend itself to remote verification, but there are some that can easily be in that category, and we should be looking at those, identifying them, and implementing them even now. And we can start by using remote verifications by phone, and certainly by email and all the technologies that we have now. So there's a lot of things that we could do. And as I mentioned, we need to test all these things through a pilot. So we shouldn't be afraid of innovations. We shouldn't be afraid of working together. And we shouldn't be afraid of thinking outside the box. And this is the time to do that. And I think we can do that. So in conclusion, virtual audits work. At BASS, we have conducted 150 of them with great success. But more planning is required by the WCO and the AEO programs to develop a uniform global practices. One more thing, one more question here before I finish. The question being, how do we promote the effectiveness of AEO around the world? So this is something that it's a good question now and before the COVID and after. How do we promote AEO around the world? I think we need a strong commitment from customs director generals. I think that the person at the top needs to really look at this tool and see how it can benefit its customs, its country, the economy, the companies that operate in their jurisdiction. But we need that commitment from the top. We need to engage trade groups like your group and others around the world and leverage them to promote the AEO program. We need to offer more training, more workshops. We need to automate the process of AEO from the beginning, applying and maintaining your AEO status. We need to look at all the technologies that exist today and get away from any paper that may be currently required. And we need to offer real benefits. So we can't say, generally speaking, an AEO program can't say we will offer facilitation benefits, but be specific, and they should be things that you can measure and that a company can see, yes, I joined the AEO program, and as a result, I'm seeing a reduction in my inspections because customs trust me, and I can now enjoy being a trusted trader and receive facilitation benefits. And finally, we need to embrace the SAFE framework of standards. This is I would call it the Bible, the basic document that supports all the things that are the good things, I should say, that we're doing in modernizing customs around the world. Pillar 1, as some of you may know, is there's 3 pillars in the SAFE framework of standards. The first one is customs to customs. So I like to introduce the subject of trust into that relationship. Customs in one country needs to trust customs in the other. The second pillar under the SAFE framework of standards has to do with customs trusting business and vice versa, so that we can work together. And the third one is relatively new, and that is customs in a given country needs to work with other agencies, border agencies, so that when a shipment comes in, just because it's clear customs doesn't mean that the importer gets the goods, because there's other agencies involved. So customs can take a lead role in coordinating these interests of other agencies so that the shipment can truly enjoy facilitation benefits. So thanks so very much, Juanita. Thanks to all of you in the association and listening in. And I look forward to addressing any questions that might come up after this webinar. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. I think you enlightened us a lot about the virtualization of the validations. I think the trade facilitation, the technology that we can use. And I like your spin on the trust. And maybe we can hand over now to Kazim to say that how can we make sure that we can trust the borders on the risk management, and what can we learn from him in our region? Thank you. Thank you, Fermin. Kazim, if you can start, thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody. Well, I will talk today about the impact of COVID-19 on road transport sector, how governments reacted to COVID-19, and how IRU responded to this pandemic. And then I share with you some lessons learned and recommended measures and guidelines in order to reduce the impact of the pandemic on supply chain, road transport, and border crossing. But before I start, let me first say a few words about IRU. IRU, in fact, is the world's road transport organization, which is the global voice of companies providing commercial road transport, mobility, and logistics services. We represent around 3.5 million transport companies, and our members are national road transport associations, mobility and logistics operators, industry bodies, research and academic institute, and leading companies supplying the sector. From our activities is from safety to innovation, environmental standards to trade policy, urban access to driver shortages. IRU works on issues at the very heart of the industry. Well, coming back to our main topic on the impact of COVID-19 on road transport and border crossing, let me first share with you some of the results of the in-depth analysis that we made using our network and our member associations around the world, and the impact of COVID-19 on both goods transport as well as passenger transport. As you may see, for goods transport, the revenue declined by 40%. And many transport operations, such as transport of automotive parts, clothing, flowers, and construction materials, have dramatically slowed to almost 100%. And empty running of the trucks increased by up to 40%, and new contracts have been declined by 60 to 90%. For passenger transport, the situation is even worse. The revenue declined on average by 50 to 100%. 50% for private operators who run public service contracts, for example, for urban transit authorities, and up to 100% for companies running scheduled intercity and international services and tourist coach services. In fact, the road transport industry make up 80% of the 80% of the road transport industry are small and medium-sized enterprises. So the high risk is that these companies now are at risk of bankruptcy. Now let me say a few words about how the governments reacted to COVID-19 when this pandemic spread. The main challenge was that we didn't see a unilateral, unified and coordinated reaction by the governments. Each and every government took a unilateral and non-coordinated measure, including on road transport and border crossing. Let me give you some examples. In Europe, for example, the countries re-established the borders. Even within the Europe, they didn't take a unified decision. Some started to re-establish borders. Then the European Commission reacted, and we saw long queues, including in some cases even 60 kilometers of queues in Europe. And the other practice that we saw was long time quarantine applied to drivers, 2 weeks waiting at each border, or prohibiting access to drivers to have access to the territory of the countries. Another practice was partial or even full closure of borders for passengers and sometimes even for freight transport. In case of Europe, at least we didn't face with any a challenge about the movement of freight, but in some other countries, other regions like West Asia and Central Asia, we faced with the full closure of the borders. Also, strict controls and sanitary measures were taken by the governments. Some of them also used convoys for transit of the trucks, which is not a good practice. We don't recommend, and due to this practice, for example, we faced with some chain of accidents with several people killed and injured. Also, some countries designated routes and parking places, fuel stations for transit and for transport, which at least was a good practice. And using transshipment was further increased because of not allowing the trucks to cross the borders. And in some countries also we saw a shift from one mode of transport to another, for example, from road to rail or from maritime or air transport to road transport. In brief, these restrictive measures have stopped or significantly reduced border crossing transport and increased cost and time of the transport. To face and to respond to these immediate and sudden changes, especially their adverse impacts on the road transport, IRU started several activities and advocacy work to face this situation. One of the main issues was we faced with a challenge of many changes in the rules and regulations of the countries, and every day we saw that these rules and regulations are changing. So we, through our network, we started to collect and share updated information on the last status of border crossings, on new decisions taken by local authorities, and that was very helpful to at least to update everybody about what's happening on the ground. We established a dedicated webpage on COVID-19 and also the Flash Info, which was a tool to send updated 24/7 days of information to all our members. And we opened this not only our members, but also to the public for everybody to use. Also, we prepared recommendations for drivers from a sanitary point of view, and also conducting survey. At the global level, we worked with the UN and other international organizations, calling them to react. We sent letters to more than 20 international organizations. We also worked on joint statements, including the one with WCO, which referred by other panelists. And also in the context of PSCG, we issued a paper introducing some of the measures that could be taken to reduce the impact of COVID-19. And in fact, PSCG was really active during this COVID-19. And furthermore, we directly contacted and sent letters to national authorities, high-level national authorities, in order to react and to remove those measures which are restrictive and are not recommended and had a negative impact on the global supply chain. So with regard to the lessons learned and the required actions, I've prepared a list of proposed measures which we have already shared this with many international organizations and at the regional and national and international level. And I will try to list and to share with you some of these important actions that I think in South and Eastern Africa maybe could be used. And these are some actions that could be, I think, helpful for the region. First of all, to implement measures in a coordinated and unified way. As I mentioned, any country, they did their own measures in a unilateral and non-coordinated manner. The second recommendation is to clearly communicate changes in enforcement measures, including on vehicles, drivers, and cargo. And for this, as I said, we have created a dedicated webpage and flash info, and I hope that we can also receive information from the region in South and Eastern Africa to share it with you and to use this platform for helping the region. The other recommendation is to ensure coordinated cross-border interventions in cooperation with other national border agencies and implement international standards such as the TIR Convention. I will talk further about the TIR Convention and come back to this point because I think it's important, especially for the region. The other recommendations was to avoid closing borders to the international transport of goods, and unfortunately we face in some countries that even they close the borders for freight and even essential goods. Another measure is to designate priority lanes such as TREPD, green lanes for commercial vehicles at all borders, which this will reduce the time and cost of the transport at borders. And APD is electronic pre-declaration. When the truck comes with electronic pre-declaration, so it could be facilitate at least the risk management and to expedite the process of release of the truck. The other action is to avoid unnecessary checking of commercial vehicles at borders, not quarantine drivers active in international transport if they don't show symptom of COVID-19. Also, to allow for maximum flexibility on the interpretation of driving rules and restrictions and tolerance measures to prolong the validity of expired controlled documents, including visas, certificates, and licenses. The other action is to designate road transport workers as key workers, giving them priority access to proper protection and disinfection equipment and material. So these are some recommendations, but with regard to the TIR Convention, maybe for those who are not familiar with this system, in fact, TIR is a UN convention, which is the only global transit system enabling goods to be shipped from one country to another and passing through transit countries in sealed load compartments that are controlled by customs via a multilateral, mutually recognized system. The benefit of this system for such a pandemic is that TIR system and its IT tools allow secure transport under customs control with limited physical checks and less contact between people at borders, thus reducing the risk of spreading the virus and protecting customs officers and drivers. Further to those recommendations, which was, I think, general, just to give you some special recommendations for Eastern and Southern Africa. One of the issues with regard to this region is that road transport and logistics sector in this region is not heard globally, because we, in fact, we don't have members in this region, while we have members in all other continents. But in this region, we have no member, and we encourage this region to join IRU so we can advocate your interest at international level. The other issue is that this region is not benefiting from existing global standards and best practices such as TIR convention. We encourage ESA countries to accede to the TIR convention, and I understand that accession to a convention is not an easy job. It takes a long time, so it will not help to address such a pandemic in a short period of time. But at the same time, we are ready to work with the region to provide other services and solutions on border crossing, including through cooperation with WCO. And last but not least, I think the Eastern Southern African region could benefit from IRU information sharing platform and use it during COVID-19. But for this, we need to receive information and update about the situation in the region, so we can share it with not only with the region, but also with the whole world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the information. Just one question, so two questions before I let you go, was coming up there. That how do you think we can, in the ESA region, become members of the IRU? That was just a cost question that they were asking. And then I just want to ask you, how does do you know about our region on the CTMS? It's a corridor transit management system. Are you aware of that? That's currently in the region. It's in the SADC region that they're busy launching that.
Well, with regard to the first question about the membership, as I mentioned, IRU membership are those who are active in the road transport sector. Usually our members are road transport national associations, but any other association which is relevant, or even international or national transport companies, or even companies which somehow are related to road transport, could join IRU. And if anyone is interested, just send me an email, so I will provide you with further information, which also exists on our website. With regard to your second question, I'm not familiar too much, because I have a colleague who you know him, who is working on the Africa region. I'm sure that he is aware, but if you provide further information, I would be happy to listen. But the main issue is that, at least what I know is that in Africa we have only a number of countries who have acceded to the TIR convention from North Africa, but in South Africa we have no member. But at least we are ready to work with you and WCO to sit together and to find a solution for the region. If so far, I think if there is no solution or no transit system for this region, so either you can join to the TIR convention, or the other possibility is to work maybe jointly with you and some regional players and also WCO to establish a kind of transit system based on our experience that we have with the tier system.
Thank you very much. What I want to do, if it's all okay with you, I'm going to accommodate Larry, which is our director that we work under on the ROCB. So he asked us to conclude the webinar not 4:30, but maybe a bit earlier because he's going to have other commitments. So if it's okay with you and if you agree, what we will do, we have another 7 questions. We will get the panelists to answer them. We will send it to them, and then we will publish it on the ESA region website. And we will definitely further engage on all the material. So I'm going to give the last word to Patrick and Larry just to say goodbye. And what we will do, I encourage you to look at our website. We will put the questions there, and we will ask the panelists to give us their written reply on that. Then we know there's continuity on what you ask and how we address it properly. Thank you very much. I really want to say out of my heart, you help us, you share some knowledge, and above all, you care about us and you want to make our region a good region and a region to be lived in. Thank you very much, Kazim and Fermin. And then I'm just going to ask Patrick and Larry if they can give closing remarks. And then I want to thank you very much for joining our webinar.
Okay, so thank you, Juanita. I mean, this has been very well coordinated. And thank you to co-panelists for, this has been a really learning experience for me coordinating in the region. I'm very much aware of the PSCG and then IRU, what you're doing globally, but of course it's not my calling as a secretariat. So this has really given a good platform for me to delve into how far we can bring your work, the WCO's influence into in the ESA region as well. But there are a few things that I've also picked up from here, and what I gather here is that in this current crisis, there's a need for continuous communication and collaboration. It's not going to end now, and in post-COVID era, I mean, hopefully, we have to even deepen this kind of relationship. We need to work together even more. And the other thing that I also picked is that we should be more innovative. We should not fear to venture because, and I admit we come from the customs background, and based on our very nature, the way we were brought up in this, I mean, to our work, we hesitate to become more innovative. This is the time to really take up some of the programs that we have hesitated and embark on acceleration or accelerated. I mean, we're looking at paperless customs, for example. If there's a time to really appreciate that customs work needs to operate on that model or in that environment, this is the time now. And time is of essence in all this. It goes to back what Fermin has also said about the AEO program, and then incorporating a lot of or accommodating a lot of innovation in that regard. So I would like to thank you all very much for this opportunity, and I guess after the program we'll be able to summarize a lot. I have seen a number of questions that were also directed to me. I will also make sure that I respond, and then we have a very comprehensive report from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Yes, what we will do is that Jakob and Liza will put the questions in a very nice format. She will send it to all the panelists, and you can reply to it on writing, and we will publish it on the ESA regional website, and then everyone can read it, and that will be very much appreciated. And thank you, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. Larry, the last famous word, and maybe a word of wisdom before we're all going to say goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. First, I must apologize for misunderstanding on the agenda. When I spoke the first time, I thought based on the agenda, I was giving the welcoming remarks. So if it's okay, I'll just say just maybe 1 or 2 things in every aspect, in every sense that was outlined in the agenda. I think when we were talking about difficulties, we mentioned the low revenue. But another difficulty that I would like to go on record that we have faced are issues of technology. Specifically, it's been a difficulty and an opportunity at the same time, matters of e-commerce, but also the lack of PPEs, the protective equipment for customs officers across East and Southern Africa. Many of us were not prepared, and we had the first 1 month, most customs officers in the region working without PPEs. On the matter of effects of regulations, I think that one is known to everyone, mainly on freedom of movement, taking into account that most countries went on lockdown and the definite economic impact. On matters of policy suggestions and regulatory amendments, I will go with what Patrick said on urging members to put in special policies for relief consignments. And I think Kazim also mentioned it in their presentation. But finally, on the lessons learned, I wanted to point out 3 things that I would want everyone to see. We have noted as a region. One is there is very strong need for investment in ICT infrastructure. We only have about 50% efficiency in IT infrastructure in this region based on the research we have done compared to Europe, to Western Europe in general. So it is our hope that revenue administrations are going to put in more energy on ICT infrastructure. The second lesson learned is innovation and domestic industries, especially in light of awakening domestic industries. When masks, the face masks came into being, in Kenya, for instance, you could get masks for up to $6. That's 600 Kenya shillings. And then they went to $1, and now you can get them free. So it's now common, almost each and every person has them. But the trick is the domestic industries woke up and people got the guidelines from the various Bureau of Standards, and now a huge majority has masks. And third and finally, on the lessons learned is just the place of e-commerce and emerging technologies. Patrick, I'm sure given time, would have told us what the WCO has been doing on emerging technologies. And so more than ever, we are going to need these. We are going to use blockchains more. We are going to use drones, because if we use drones and customs robotics, it will reduce the normal intrusion on people and personnel. So these are 3 lessons that have strongly come out from East and Southern Africa. And finally, on the last presentation, I think there was the mention on the issue of quarantine and just letting drivers go by. I will give you an example of Kenya-Tanzania border, because I'm closer to that. Initially, drivers were let to go. And it happened that many of these, probably up to 100% of them, are asymptomatic, so you cannot know. But Kenya installed mobile clinics at the borders, which were tested, bringing up tests with rapid results within just hours. And turns out nearly 50% of the drivers that were coming in from the neighboring country had COVID-18. So while we support the need not to quarantine drivers, we might want to push the need for them to drive with a certificate, a COVID-free certificate that will help. And once they have that from their country, then it should be okay. And still on the TIR, I must admit, I didn't know the numbers are so low in Africa. As Kazim was talking, I checked, I only saw Egypt and Morocco. And so I think it's something that I'll request Juanita and the regional PSCG to take up with us, so that we encourage our members to join these and to accede to the convention. Most of the superpowers are already members of the TIR. So that said, thank you so much. I hope we do this again, and I'm really, really grateful to this opportunity and for working with us towards this. Thank you, and bless everybody.
Thank you very much, Larry. So we're all going to say goodbye. We will put everything on the website, and I think we will have another webinar in May. And thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure hosting you, and I think we're moving outside COVID-19, hopefully to a new future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.